Thank you. So welcome to those in attendance to this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council on the 9th of October 2023. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that it should not leave the meeting during consideration of any of the reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to 3 requests for a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the Council's scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mr. Masson, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed in the conduct of these reviews and take a roll call of all members present. Mr. Masson.
Thank you. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you. So just in terms of the roll call, we can see that we've got Councillors McRae who will be chairing the meeting, Councillor MacDonald, Councillor Radley and Councillor Facker, and as I mentioned earlier, Councillor Lawrence has submitted his apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Masson. Okay, turning to the consideration of the first review, this is in respect of a decision to refuse the planning application for the erection of a balcony with external stairs and formation of door from an existing window opening to the rear of 36 Albion Place, Aberdeen, AB10 1YN, planning reference number 230652. We will now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Ms. Green's attendance today provides us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she has not been involved in any of the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, her role will be a neutral one, involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll just share my screen. Screen. Right. Right, thank you. So this review is into the non-determination of the application for the erection of the balcony, etc. And the review was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the expiry of the prescribed period, which in this case is 2 months from the validation date or an agreed extension. The applicant has noted on the notice of review that there are no new matters raised in the submissions. And in terms of procedure, the applicant noted on the form that the review may proceed on the basis of the information submitted, although I did note that later in the statement they did raise the point that it'd be useful for the LRB to see the site. Anyway, I will provide some background information to the case before handing back for members to decide how to proceed. So this is the site location plan, site edge red here, and other land owned by the applicant outlined in blue just there. So the property is located on the south side of Albine Place, just to the east of the Queen's Cross Church. And the site lies within the Albine Place and Riberslough Conservation Area and is Category C listed. Properties on the same side of Albine Place appear to be in commercial and office use. With number 35 next door is a vacant office at the time of writing of the case officer's report. Within the wider area, there's a mix of uses, including residential. And this is just street view and aerial photographs of the site. So this is the application property here with the front area and rear garden within the red line. And the front of the house from Albine Place. So as you can see, this is from Albine Place as a 2-storey granite semi-detached house with access and car parking at the front. And this is a view of the 3D view of the rear of the property just there with the garden and the other half of the semi just there. And due to the topography, it's 3 stories to the rear, which is the south. And the listed description of the rear is quoted in the case officer's report and notes the 3 windows set in the bowed bay to ground and first floor. And then to the rear, there's the garden enclosed along both sides by traditional rubble granite walls. And beyond the garden, in the applicant's ownership, as I mentioned, is car parking and garages accessed off Albine Lane. So that's there. Site location plan, just so it's showing the sites. All, as I mentioned, you can just see the proposed balcony there. And then turning to the plans, this is basement level and existing basement plan here. And then with the, just showing the outline of the balcony, which would be at ground floor level, so a level up from here. And you can see the doors that have been created from a window opening at the rear here. So the window opening was enlarged vertically. It was left the same width to create the double door opening onto the decking below the proposed balcony. So this is the ground floor plan as existing and then as proposed. So you can see the timber decked balcony with the steps coming up from the garden level. And this would be a steel construction with timber to the decking and the step treads. And that's the rear elevation as existing. So that's the existing window opening that would be extended downwards to create door opening. And then the balcony would be at this level. And the next slide just shows, it's taken from the applicant's statement, just shows a photograph of the rear of the building. And then the proposed south elevation showing the balcony and steps. And then this one is just to show the doorway which is obviously obscured partly by the steps. So it obviously won't appear like that. It's just for to illustrate the changes to the opening there. The balcony would be supported on steel legs off pads at ground level, and the sides would be protected by 1.1 metre high steel railings. And it would extend to an overall width of 6.13 metres across the rear elevation of the building, and would have a total projection of 3.6 metres of the building. The total floor space, excluding the stairs, would extend to 15.5 square metres. Side elevations, the west elevation. Just put the existing at a smaller scale so that I can have this proposed a bit larger. Just shows the curved steps coming down there. And it notes that the balcony would be coated in black paint. Moving on to the east elevation. Similar there, you can see the steel legs that would support the structure. And these are cross sections that were submitted. So obviously not showing the steps, but depends where the cross section's taken as to, I think that's why the steps aren't shown. And this is the details of the doorway that would be installed at basement level. With the LRB came in this drawing from engineers, just showing, which actually shows the materials, so the steel work that would make up the balcony and steps. So there's just more detail on this. It's the same proposal as was shown on the elevation previously. And similarly, that's just the elevation from the side. So it's SHS is a square hollow section of steel. The handrail, circular hollow section. And then that's just showing the details of the treads of the steps, which would have timber within the steelwork. So moving on to the draft report of handling, gave various reasons for the recommendation, which are summarised on here. First of all, saying that the door opening at basement level is generally compliant. There isn't a justification for the loss of the small amount of granite and its details of its reuse, or for the loss of the original window. However, the principle would be acceptable in terms of Historic Environment Scotland guidance and policy and local development plan guidance and policy on windows and doors. Secondly, in relation to the balcony, the excessive scale, inappropriate design and limited detail on material would have an adverse effect on the built environment, contrary to design policy in both the National Planning Framework and the local plan. The proposed balcony would have a significant negative impact on the integrity, character and special architectural interest of the listed building and its overall setting. It would be oversized in scale and the height at which the balcony would be fixed. And it would be clearly visible from outside the application site, so that it would neither preserve nor enhance the character of the conservation area. The next slide continues with the reasons for the recommendation in the report of handling. It refers to managing change guidance from Historic Environment Scotland on external fixtures, which refers to considerations of scale of the fixtures and also the method of fixing to the original building. And the report concludes that the balcony is of an inappropriate scale and materials and fixing method are unknown. Obviously, those materials have now been clarified with the engineer's drawing. And the report goes on to state that the proposal would be contrary to historic environment policies in both National Planning Framework and the Local Development Plan, the Historic Environment Policy for Scotland, and also to the Managing Change guidance that I mentioned before on external fixtures. In terms of the zoning policy in the Local Development Plan, it's within the West End office area, and that requires all development proposals to respect the special historic and architectural character of the West End. So moving on to the applicant's case. There's quite a lot of detail in this. Details of the history of the building and its residential use in the past are given. It's noted that the building's category C listed and in the conservation area. Refers to details of ownership of the car parks to the rear that I referred to on plans previously. It notes that number 35, the attached half of the semi, is a vacant office building, and that number 37 on the other side has a large extension to the rear, which was visible in the photographs that I showed earlier. It describes how the building is being reverted to a family home and that the original balcony fell into disrepair and was removed. That was a cast iron balcony. It describes the history of applications relatively recently at the site, contacts with the planning authority over the course of the applications and amendments made. That refers to a previous application which included the balcony initially, and then the balcony was removed from that application, which was approved. It states the applicant's commitment to the property and the desire for to bring back residential use into the building and the area. That there are no objections from neighbours or consultees. It states that the distance to the rear lane would hide the balcony from view, and also refers to the screening, natural screening from trees. States that the balcony would help with access for maintenance to the building. It requests a visit from the LRB to see the context of the balcony. It clarifies that other aspects of the proposal are acceptable and that the focus of the recommendation to refuse is the balcony. However, it goes on to say that there is no issue in principle with the balcony as there was one originally on the building, and questions whether the balcony does comply with policy. Just continuing on the applicant's case, it looks at the statement of special interest on the building, which refers to details on the frontage and notes that the frontage is actually unaffected. In terms of the conservation area character appraisal, that document notes exemplars which don't include number 36, the application property. It further notes changes to back gardens in the area and notes that there are many large extensions behind high walls. In terms of impact on the conservation area, it draws attention to the natural screening, meaning the trees, and also a 2-metre fence approved at the end of the rear garden. States that there would be fleeting views only through the opening to the car park from Albine Lane. And it says that there are therefore there's no impact on the conservation area. Also taking into account the rear extension next door as part of the context. It notes that the balcony would not affect special features as defined by the statement of special interest, and that the proposal would therefore comply with policy, I think that's meant to be policy D6 on the historic environment, because D8 relates to windows and doors. The design it describes why it's not possible to replicate the original balcony, which was cast iron and had quite narrow steps, due to current building regulations. And so in terms of proportions, the spiral stair, the materials, and also the height and spaces within the handrails, but states that the proposal does comply with design policy. Provides justification for the doorway in terms of providing access to the garden. And it says that the proposal has been informed by an understanding of the significance of the listed building and that the proposal would allow future enjoyment of the building. In terms of external features, it states that the balcony is designed to reflect the original and it matches the width of the original. And it accords with the guidance, being a secondary elevation, which it stated can often accommodate new fixtures without significant impact. The managing change guidance refers to non-ferrous materials, and the applicant states that steel is necessary to use steel and that it would be hot galvanized, which would prevent corrosion. So just to note also that in terms of consultations, there was no response received from Queen's Cross and Harlaw Community Council, and there were no representations received. So at that point, I will hand back to you, convener, for a decision on further procedure.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members are reminded that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, we can request further written information to be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. So at the moment, I feel that we have sufficient information, so I'm happy to proceed at this point. But we'll just go around the room. So Councillor Thacker.
Yeah, also happy.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
I'm fine to proceed, thanks.
And Councillor Radcliffe.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you. As members feel they have sufficient information, we'll now hand back to Ms. Green, who will talk us through the relevant policies and considerations for this review. Ms. Green.
Thanks. I'll share my screen again. Okay, many of the policies have been referred to already by the reference to the case officer's report and the applicant's statement. Just to run through them. First of all, in terms of legislation, there's the requirement to have regard to the desirability of preserving the listed building and its setting, and also to proposals should preserve and enhance the character of the conservation area. So turning to National Planning Framework policies, policies 1 and 2 are overarching policies and they apply really to all proposals. Policy 7, as has been mentioned, is on historic assets, and it states that development proposals for the reuse and extensions of listed buildings will only be supported where they preserve the character, special architectural or historic interest and the setting. So that's really the key point for consideration in the application. Policy 14 on design just seeks high quality design for development proposals to improve the overall quality of an area. And is similar to policy 1 in the local development plan, policy D1, sorry, which seeks to ensure high standards of design for development proposals with a strong and distinctive sense of place as a result of appraisal of context, detailed planning and quality architecture, craftsmanship and materials. The site is zoned within the West End area under policy VC6, and that states that all applications for all development must take into account existing uses and avoid undue conflict. It's not the use that's in question here, obviously. In terms of this proposal, it requires that all development proposals respect the special historic and architectural character of the West End. Policy D8 on windows and doors is also of relevance and states that historic windows and doors are required to be retained, repaired and restored. So turning to interim guidance and also national policy from Historic Environment Scotland, the Aberdeen Planning Guidance contains specific guidance where windows and doors are being added or replaced. Historic Environment Policy, similar to policies in the National Planning Framework and the LDP, in that it requires proposals to preserve the character of listed buildings. It accepts changes to the historic environment, but with the understanding, with an understanding of the special architectural interest of listed buildings, and that intervention is minimised and negative impact avoided. The interim planning guidance on repair and replacement of windows and Historic Environment Scotland's guidance on doorways both advise that new doorways should be incorporated into the existing architecture and detailed in a way that's compatible with the existing historic fabric. And the managing change guidance notes that secondary elevations are more suitable for work and notes the approach of retaining the width of window openings and extending in openings downwards when creating door openings. Guidance on external features would be relevant to the balcony, and it states that new features can have a substantial impact on the appearance of a historic building, with fixtures and method of fixing requiring special consideration, as mentioned previously. And we've also mentioned previously the conservation area character appraisal for Albine Place and Ruber's Law. So moving on to the evaluation, applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan, which consists of the National Planning Framework as well as the Local Development Plan 2023, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. In this case, there's an important duty to have special regard to the desirability of preserving the building and its setting and preserving or enhancing the character of the conservation area. And as with all cases, each application is treated on its merits. So the basis for the decision in this application, the zoning policy is the West End areas policy, and as I said before, the use isn't in question, but that policy also requires consideration of the impact on the historic environment. So does the proposal protect the character and setting of the listed building, and does it preserve or enhance the conservation area with reference to the policies and guidance that have been noted? And overall, does it comply with the development plan or other material considerations that would indicate otherwise? And I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Do any members have any questions? Donald.
I couldn't see reference in the pack either, but did Historic Environment Scotland have oversight of this application?
Well, there was also a listed building consent application, which they would have been consulted on. So that would be appealed to the Scottish Government.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a question for myself. We note that the applicant has mentioned the scaling of the balcony to the original size. I take it that's in width. Was there any evidence submitted for that, or is there any historical documents that show that's the case?
I understand that there is an existing balcony on the other half of the semis, but I don't have any photographs or diagrams of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Drawings.
So the scale we're really talking about here is the how much it sort of extends from the granite property out into the garden is the scaling that we're talking about here.
Yes, and the other, the original had a spiral staircase as well, so that's a different.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members? Okay, so we'll move on. So in accordance with the procedure note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the matter in which the review is to proceed. I will highlight that all representations relating to the case have now been considered and taken into account. So we now move into sort of the discussion and determination. So would any members wish to enter into this? Yep, Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, I would have concerns at the last point that you made, convener, about the size of the balcony, the extent, the 15 meters squared, I think was the figure, roughly the figure given to us, and also the impact that it would have, and I think a negative impact on the existing building and conservation area. I just think that excessive scale, the use of the materials, and perhaps even the fixing, but I'm not so sure about that. But certainly the design and the materials and the scale does not seem, in my view, that it goes with policies that we have both at national and at local level.
Yeah, I would say I sort of agree along that lines. My concern with that is the amount of businesses, which is in the adjoining properties as well, have considerably larger extensions out the back of that than they've been approved, but this balcony wouldn't be. So I'm kind of conflicted in that terms. Yes, I understand that, you know, where we're sitting with the terms of the way that the planning officers come forward for this, but we have allowed considerably larger extensions in the buildings next to it. Councillor Radley?
I would agree with yourself, convener, and I would say it's bringing a property back into use that, you know, has laid vacant for a significant amount of time. We know also that the property beside it is also vacant, and the size and scale of the balcony, I would argue along the same lines as yourself, convener, that it is significantly smaller than some of the extensions to the rear of other properties. So I would argue that it is in keeping.
Yeah, I would also note that on the back of that as well, quite a lot of the policies in terms of that we're going to hear specifically mention sort of the frontage of the property, and how the public would oversee that. Now this is to the rear of the property, and the applicant has talked about existing screening and fencing that's going to be going in place as well there. So it's sort of, I wouldn't say that it completely removes the view of somebody who's walking past that at the end of the property and would look into the garden, but would still see it there, but that is as that point. But yeah, I do also get the point that Councillor MacDonald that you made of what we've currently got here. Is there anything you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I hear what you say about the other buildings, but in the context of what we have, this granite, a lovely granite building with a conservation on it, order on it, I just feel that we have to, you know, particularly make our minds up around what is in front of us, and whether, you know, decisions and planning rules were different, or you know, when these large extensions were put in place. I cannot, you know, it's very clear to me that the actual door going out into the garden could be put in, and that the access would be from that kind of entertainment cinema area of the home. But, you know, to get it coming out of the living area, I suppose what has been proposed in front of us, I think is personally, I think is over the top for the type of and size of building, the scale, and you know, looking at perhaps other materials. I don't know. I just think the whole thing does not fit with the back of that building. And I think there would be other things that could be done to you know, make that a very desirable home to live in. It's not going to change what's on the officers side of it. Would be my view.
Mhm. Okay. Anyone else want to come in? Councillor Thacker?
Just to say, I think I broadly agree with Councillor Radley on this point. If it brings a building back into use, I think that would be really good to see. And it is to the rear of the building. And if we look at the rear of the buildings along there, you know, you've got lots of kind of big car parks and big office, you know, modern office extensions. So I think this balcony, you know, it doesn't stick out negatively when you look at what's existing there. And the prospect of bringing the building back into use is quite exciting.
Can I just come in on that point? Because would it
Yeah.
really stop anybody bringing the building back into use to have access on a balcony of that size to the garden? I'm not convinced by that argument. I think it could be brought back into habitable use as it is. Personally, it might be something that would be an extra, but I can't see it stopping anybody living in a wonderful granite building in our city, to be honest.
Yeah, I can see that point as well. I think I guess with bringing a balcony back in to what it was originally, the applicant has stressed that it probably wouldn't meet current building standards or building design in terms of safety, in terms of the height of the handrails and the width of the treads that come up into the balcony. So yeah. Anyone else want to come back in on that? Or are we happy to move to determination at this point? Okay, so yeah. At this point, I would say that I would be leaning towards overturning the officer's recommendations at this point and allow us to go forward. My reasons for this is in terms of the scale, it's relatively small in nature compared to the businesses and their sizable extensions that are at the adjoining sides of the property. I'm content with the distance from the pavilion at the back and the screening that is being proposed into this, and that this is at the rear of a property that's not into the frontage of the building, which will be retained as the original features of the building. Would it protect the character and enhance the area? I think it would. Bringing the rear garden back into use would probably enhance the area. So I would be leaning towards that way as well. So that's sort of where I'm thinking on this at the moment. So I would be for approval for this to go ahead. Any other member want to enter?
Convener, I would be going with officers' recommendations. I believe that in preserving the character of the area, as I stated earlier, and in the size and design and materials and so on, I would be not refusing the application again.
Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Radley.
I would be more minded to go with yourself, convener. The reasons you stated.
Okay. Councillor Thacker.
Likewise, I would be minded to move with approving the balcony.
Thank you very much. So in that, we now move that the local review body has therefore agreed to, by majority, overturn the decision of the appointing officer. We now need to consider if any additional conditions should be attached to the approval of the applications. Ms. Green.
I think the plans that we got from the engineers did give details of materials, but as far as I can see, not details of fixings into the building, the balcony into the building. So I could recommend perhaps a condition to provide details of that.
Yeah, are members happy to accept Councillor MacDonald?
I just wanted to ask about the other things I wasn't very clear about was the black painting around, and does it have to be black, the painting of the sides of the balcony, can I ask?
Well, that is detailed on the drawing, I think, because the original would have been a black painted cast iron, and I assume that's what's at the neighbouring property.
Understood. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So if members are content with the condition to the engineers to come back with the further detail with regards to the fixings of the balcony and if it's going to be fixed into the building or not, are we content to move forward with that? Seeing nodding heads. Okay. So please note that decision notes from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant or agent in the forthcoming days. Thank you very much. So we now turn to the consideration of the second review in respect to a decision to refuse the application for the change of use from public open space to private gated communal garden and erection of associated enclosure fence with gate retrospective at land to the rear of 6 Craig Den, Aberdeen, AB 15 6YW, planning reference 221307. We will now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application. As previous, Ms. Green is here to provide us with necessary professional planning providence and has not been involved in the early consideration of the review. Ms. Green, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, this review is into the refusal of an application under delegated powers for the change of use of the public open space and erection of fence, and it's a retrospective application. And the review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The applicant has indicated on the notice that there are no new matters raised in the review submissions. However, it is noted in the statement of support that there's a new matter, which I'll mention as I go through my presentation. In terms of procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review can proceed on the basis of a site visit and not solely on the basis of the information submitted. And that's because it's considered appropriate to view the fence in context and see its benefits. So I'll continue and provide some background to the case before handing back for members to decide how to proceed. So this shows the site outlined in red here to the west rear of 6 Craig Den. Just within this wider context, this is the site here. And you can see Woodhill Hospital and then Queen's Road down at the bottom, and that's the viaduct leading to the hospital. So the site is 780 metres squared. It's roughly 30 metres along the south side and 28 metres long. At the time of the officer's report, it contained cut grass with some trees and shrubs. It's understood subsequently that it's been rewilded and that this longer grass has been grown over this summer. Boundary enclosures are in the form of fences. Those have been erected, and there's a gate within the fences along the south side. And to the east are the rear gardens of properties at 5, 6 and 7 Craig Den, and then to the west is the viaduct that leads to the hospital. And to the south and west is the remainder of the public open space of North Burn of Ruberslaw, with mature woodland, the burn, and footpaths linking to the surrounding residential areas. And the nearest one is just to the south. Trees are covered by tree preservation order within that area. And this is just an aerial photograph showing the site there. You can see the outline of most of the fence there. And this is just a Google 3D image. This wall, retaining wall, forms the north end of the area, and then obviously the fence is there. And this is the plan that was submitted with the application, showing existing rear garden fence, and then this is the fence that was added in red here. And then there's the retaining wall at that end. And elevations of the fences, which are 1.8 metres in height. And similar to the rear garden fences, they have the posts on the outside of the fence. And there are 2 gates in the fences, one into the garden of number 6, which is the applicant, and that's stated as being for maintenance purposes rather than because the area is part of the garden. And one gate in the fence on the south side, and that's just indicated there. In terms of planning history, there were 4 trees on the site removed with permission in 2019. Planning permission was granted in 1998 for the Craig Den housing development, and the site was included as part of the open space provision of that site. The statement with the application stated that the site had been vandalised and notes that it is not part of the garden of number 6. It remains a communal open space. And I'll go through the statement in more detail in a moment. These are taken from the applicant's statement. It's obviously taken from the viaduct. This one, I'm looking down at the space. So these are from the reason for refusal in the decision notice, and also from the report of handling, the case officer's report. The following points are noted: that the proposal results in the loss of public open space, which was required as part of an earlier planning permission, that the proposal would therefore affect the character and amenity of the surrounding area, and that they would prevent access to the space for recreation and general access rights and rights of way by the wider public, and that they therefore reduce access and the recreation value of the green space network of which this is part. Also, that the proposal is contrary to the aims to enhance access in the Local Development Plan and National Planning Framework 4 in terms of health and well-being. That the proposal would set a precedent, resulting in the gradual erosion of open space. That it would be contrary to design policies which seek inclusive layouts and also passive surveillance, and that's because it would be fenced in, preventing passers-by surveying what's happening in that area. That it would be contrary to policies on design, green infrastructure, the green space network, and also the policy for residential areas. That access rights relating to the Land Reform Act should apply. There's no reason why they can't plan this site. Also, that many locals from the sort of wider area wouldn't have access to the space, and also that the fact that crime has happened there is not a material consideration. So one other point, there's that the report also notes that the value of the application site as a public open space was quantified in the open space audit, and it scored highly in terms of its quality, particularly in terms of its place and biodiversity scores. It was included as part of the wider open space. It also states in the report that there is a desire line between the footpath to the south and one to the northwest that would run through this site. So turning to the applicant's case, this notes that the area is accessible to all residents as they have a combination lock on the gate and residents have been informed of the code. It refers, and this is the new information, refers to an encampment of travellers on the land by the owner of that adjacent land, which included 3 caravans. Just to note that that new information wasn't available at the time of the application as it hadn't happened. So the next point made by the applicant is that permission was granted for works in association with allotments on land to the north, and the access road was created and steel fencing was erected. And that was the subject of an appeal that was approved at appeal. So in terms of the back garden of number 6, the applicant describes the sort of history of vandalism and littering of people throwing things from the bridge, as well as people actually accessing the space and vandalising trees. And it describes how the garden of number 6 is exposed from the bridge when there are no trees in that area. That trees had been planted previously and they were vandalised, and also people congregated under the bridge. And then when the land ownership changed, trees were removed. That's by the previous owner of the land. That subsequently, the erection of fencing and the maintaining of the area has transformed it. Points out that objectors to the application don't stay in the local area. Also, that the open space audit identifies a need for better quality and accessible space, and that requirements are flexible, and also that the Hazelhead area is well provided for in terms of open space. They query whether the open space strategy and audit should be noted within the reason for refusal because of their age, and the audit was 2010. And again, mention the appeal on the allotments, where the appeal reporter found that the loss of open space in that instance was minor, with enough space remaining elsewhere in the area. The applicant's case continued. They raised the possibility that the site could be considered forestry because of the number of trees that had been planted, and if that were to be the case, it wouldn't constitute development, and it does remain open space. They note that the land is held in separate title to the house. It's not part of the garden, and they refer to title deeds and the responsibilities in terms of those to maintain woodland. They state that there's sufficient amenity space in the area and that continues to be accessible. They note that the fence matches other fences around rear gardens and it's not detrimental to amenity or character of the area. That allowing trees to establish in the area will improve amenity. That the area does not constitute valued open space. That's a reference to policy on residential areas, as it was full of brambles and also rubbish. They state that the proposal is for a private gated communal garden, and that is a form of open space, and that there's therefore no loss of open space. that the proposal will allow the delivery of nature restoration and biodiversity, which are supported by Policy 20 in NPF4 and also Policy NE2 on green infrastructure, and obviously also the overriding policies in NPF4. They note that no core paths are impacted, and in terms of precedent, they state that each planning application should be decided on merit, and that this area had its own particular issues and own particular benefits from the proposal. And although the fence requires planning permission due to the proximity of the road, the applicant's agent notes that the road is actually 20 metres above the site, and there's no relationship between the road and the site or impact on visibility. In terms of the passive surveillance referred to in the case officer's report, the applicant's agent notes that that's not referred to in Policy 14 of NPF4, and so shouldn't be a reason for refusal in terms of that particular policy. They also note that the area is not council owned. That's a reference to one of the objectors, and also that cameras would not stop vandalism. Finally, they note that the applicant would accept a temporary approval or a condition for the fence to be removed when the trees mature. And also just to mention, in terms of consultations, Police Scotland were consulted and didn't respond. Wood End Community Council, there was no response received. In terms of representations, there were 2 objections and 4 letters of support. The objections noted that the fence conflicts with residential policy on open space, design and open space policies. Due to the height and location of the fence, would have an impact on its surroundings and also the loss of the open space. That the area shouldn't be locked up and is a loss of public open space and also for wildlife, and notes that security cameras could be used instead. In support of the proposal, representations state that the area is improved with trees and shrubs having been planted and that it was previously messy with rubbish. That access is provided to neighbours. The overall proposal improves the area and there's a commitment to maintaining amenity. So a further letter of support was submitted in terms of the LRB from one of the previous senders of support. And that letter noted that the proposal has improved the area, that recent unauthorised traveller encampments would have been even larger if the area had been unfenced, and that this the situation I just referred to caused stress to residents and has been resolved. They also raised the same issues of the land to the north of Craigden, which is where I mentioned the appeal for facilities relating to allotments. So at that point, I will refer back to you, convener, for a decision on how to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members reminded that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request further written information to be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. At this moment, I am content with that we have sufficient information to proceed. Councillor MacDonald.
Convener, I'm struggling with the topography of the area. It's just an area I don't know terribly well. I mean, there is a lot of information in front of us, but I am considering whether a site visit might be worthwhile, just to understand the relationship. It seems not just to be about this application, but everything else that's happening around the site of the application, the retrospective fence in particular.
Yeah, I think it can be difficult that because of the viaduct that goes overhead, we can't quite use Google mapping and Earth to its full potential there. Councillor Radley.
I'm minded to agree with Councillor MacDonald. I'm struggling with where everything is in relation to each other, and with the viaduct being there and the scale of it.
Okay, Councillor Thacker.
Likewise, and getting a kind of better feel for the area, a site visit could be useful in that regard.
Not a problem. I'll take Mr. Masson to give us a little bit of advice on this one to when and
Yes, obviously,
be
yeah.
arranged.
Okay, well, we could do that offline. We could arrange a site visit, and we could all just either meet there at some point agreed by everybody. But I'll take that offline with the four of yous. So we'll just move on to the next item now.
That's fine. No worries. We will defer this one to a later point, and we will organise a site visit to see what's going on here and make a decision at a later point. Okay, okay. Find where I'm on paperwork now. Okay, so turning to the consideration of the third review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the change of use, house of multiple application, to service apartments retrospective at 636 King Street, Aberdeen, AB241 SM, planning reference 230918. We'll now hear from planning officer in attendance, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description and application proposal and remind reasons as to why the application was refused. As before, point out that Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with necessary professional planning guidance and will not be able to express a view either way. Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll share my screen again. All right. So this request for a review is in terms of conditions on an application that was approved conditionally under delegated powers. And the original application was for change of use of a house that was in multiple occupation to serviced apartments, and it's retrospective. So it was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit. The applicant indicated there were no new matters raised in the submissions and also indicated that the review may proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll continue to provide some background information before handing back for members to decide how to proceed. So looking at the location plan, as the site outlined in red here, as a detached house on King Street. As you can see, that's the roundabout St Macha Drive. So it's just to the north of that on the east side of the street. And obviously King Street is a busy road and the property lies within a largely residential area, with properties immediately surrounding it in residential use. The report notes that the building to the north contains 2 flats and the building to the south is a house in multiple occupation with a license for 5 persons. So this is just a street view image of the front of the property, and then the overhead photography, just showing it there. Front garden and rear garden, and that's a 1.5-story house with a flat roofed extension to the rear. So as I said, the application is retrospective. It's a change of use from HMO, which had a license for 7 rooms, to a 7-bed serviced apartments. And this shows, it's a little bit unclear, but I couldn't get it any better than this. So it shows the creation of 7 self-contained rooms. This is the ground floor. So, well, room 1 has had the kitchenette added. This was an existing ensuite. Room 2 has had an ensuite added and these kitchenette facilities. Room 3, again, ensuite added and kitchenette facilities. And then room 4 has got this existing kitchen and shower room to the rear. Then moving on to the first floor, So you've added ensuite facilities to these rooms, and there's an existing shared kitchen for those 2 rooms to share. Similarly, room 7 has got access to an existing shower room, and then there's a communal laundry. So that's a photograph of the rear garden that was included in the applicant's submissions. Run through the reasons for the decision to approve the application. I'll move on to the conditions just after that. So the reasons were that the proposal provides tourist accommodation, which accords with LDP policy VC2 on tourism, and also NPF4 policy 30 on tourism. And in terms of those policies, the benefits to the local economy of tourism are balanced against potential loss of residential accommodation. And it was considered in the approval that there's currently no significant harm through the loss of housing. That the proposal for serviced apartments, there was no harm to amenity of the area, and that there was adequate amenity for guests for short-term stays only. And the report notes that the rooms are single aspect and of a size that wouldn't be suitable for longer term accommodation. Also, reasons for the decision are that the site is accessible by public transport and active travel, being well connected to bus and footpaths. That refuse storage is acceptable, and that the proposal is small scale in terms of climate change and climate change mitigation, the nature crisis and biodiversity. There's no real impact from the point of view of those policies. So the proposal was approved, and there were 3 conditions attached. The first one just stated that the proposal had to be implemented within 3 years, and obviously it has been implemented, so that one is not in question. So condition 2 is this one that requires that the property shouldn't be occupied for a period of more than 90 days by any one family or individual. And the reason for that is that the apartments are not suitable for use as permanent mainstream housing due to the level of amenity. And the report also notes that the size of the rooms is 20 to 25 metres squared, single aspect, as I mentioned, with basic kitchen facilities and shower room. And for those reasons, found to be not suitable for permanent accommodation. Condition 3 is the time limit of 5 years, so temporary permission. And that, so the impact of this condition would be that after 5 years, if the applicant wanted to continue the use, they would need to reapply for planning permission. And the reasons given in the report for the attachment of that condition are to ensure that local housing need and demand and supply can be considered for any future applications for the continued use of the property as serviced apartments. So the impact on the local housing situation could be considered. And also it would allow for the site to be automatically returned to residential use upon the expiry of the permission, unless, of course, a new application was submitted and approved. Also, and finally, to consider the demonstrable local economic benefits of the property's use as serviced apartments at the time of any further planning application. So the applicant's case for appealing these 2 conditions. In terms of condition 2, the maximum length of 90 days for any one person, it's considered that's unduly restrictive because they have returning guests staying for short periods but totaling more than 180 days in a year. And they give examples of people visiting for lecturing, construction workers, healthcare workers, including locums. And they say that they have established relationships with clients and they would need to refuse their bookings, which would not be a good thing to do. And in terms of condition 3, the applicant states that they have long-term plans for the use of the property for service departments. So they would wish to remove the condition for the temporary permission for 5 years. Moving on to consultations, the roads team had no objection. There's no parking at the property, but that's the same situation as it was for the HMO, and there are good public transport and active travel links. And there was no response received from Seaton and Linksfield Community Council, and there were no representations. So at that point, I'll hand back to you, convener, to decide how to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information for us today to take a decision on the application. Members, reminder that if we do not feel we have enough information to take a decision, we can request further written information to be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. I feel that we have sufficient information in regards to this application at this point. Let's go around the room. Councillor Radley.
Agreed.
Councillor MacDonald.
I agree too.
Councillor Thacker.
Agreed.
Thank you. As members feel they have sufficient information, we'll now pass back to Ms. Green for the relevant policies and considerations for this review.
Thank you, convener. So just to review the policies which fed into the reasons for the conditions. So obviously it's policies in the Local Development Plan 2023 and NPF4 that are relevant. And this is looking at policy 30 in National Planning Framework. And so it promotes tourism facilities with their impact on the economy, local economy. So this part is the most relevant. Proposals for tourism related development will take into account impacts on communities, for example, by hindering the provision of homes and services for local people. So that's what condition 3 was really taking into account, these parts of the policy. And then section E, development proposals for the reuse of existing buildings. The short-term holiday letting will not be supported where the proposal will result in an unacceptable impact on local amenity or loss of residential accommodation, where it's not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And then in the local development plan, the policy on tourism it supports proposals for new facilities to strengthen the appeal of Aberdeen to tourists. And also looking at policy H1, the zoning policy for this area. In terms of non-residential uses, which this is a quasi-residential use, but it talks about whether those uses are considered complementary to residential use and whether there would be conflict with residential amenity. We're just turning to the government's publication on short-term lets from November 21. They talk about short-term lets making contributions to the local economy. And they talk about the demand for visitor accommodation, particularly over short periods of time. And then also the positive impacts of short-term lets on local economy. And then the circular on short-term lets and planning. I've just put in a couple of paragraphs from that here, and it states that authorities can impose conditions to require the permitted use to be discontinued after a specified period. And that gives them the opportunity to review the use. And they note there 10 years or such other period as they consider appropriate when granting planning permission. For short-term lets in controlled areas or outside, this isn't a controlled area, so or outside if they see fit. And it's also noted that the housing need and demand assessment is on a 5-year cycle, which the case officer gave as a reason for the 5-year permission. In terms of supplementary guidance on service departments, it notes that they are sui generis and not within a use class. Apartments should be in a single ownership and are not considered permanent housing. They mustn't be detrimental to residential amenity outside the city centre. They are considered on merit. Travel and parking are considerations. And it actually says that the planning authority will usually seek a legal agreement to ensure single ownership, ensure they're not permanent housing, and specify a maximum length of continuous occupancy, which is normally the 90 days. So that's where the 90 days has come in. Obviously, that's been done by condition in this instance rather than a legal agreement. So in terms of consideration of the conditions, development plan is the relevant consideration and each application treated on its merits. So the basis for this decision, the zoning policy is the residential areas policy, but the questions in terms of these applications are actually, is there a need to condition the temporary permission in order to review the impact on the local housing market in 5 years' time? And is there a need to condition the maximum 90-day stay in relation to the suitability of the accommodation as permanent housing? And members may alter or remove the conditions. And again, does the proposal comply with the development plan is still a consideration here? And are there material considerations that would weigh for or against that? And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Questions? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, convener. I'd like to ask around the terminology of continuous occupancy. So if somebody was to stay in the property, and I'm guessing short-term let could be anywhere from one night to, up to 90 days, I guess. If you were to stay for 1 week out of 4, or even 1 week out of 2, as was mentioned, is it the continuous that is the important thing, or is it the 90 days? Or in the case that was mentioned by the applicant, 180 days.
The way that the condition is written, it's that shall not be occupied for a period in excess of 90 days in any one calendar year. So it'd be the total. Never mind how many times, how many occasions. It's just whether it adds up to over 90 days.
Thank you. That clarifies, because that what I wasn't sure about.
Thank you. In terms of the 90 days, how is that monitored? Say if someone stays 91 or 92 days, how is that picked up? How is that monitored and fed back?
Yes, that's an interesting question, which is why the guidance usually recommends that there would be a legal agreement. I mean, obviously, if there's an impact on residential amenity, then that could be reported by someone to our enforcement team, but it would be difficult for an enforcement officer to pick up that 91-day stay, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm also struggling here a little bit in terms of the nature of short-term let, but yet the applicant is saying that people are potentially staying up to half a year. Where does that fall? You know, short-term let is a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks, not 6 months. That I'm struggling with that short-term let aspect of that.
Yeah, I mean, our guidance, that's why it has the sort of 90-day limit in it. I mean, I think, although it's sort of envisaged that it's mainly tourist stays, in this instance, the applicant seems to be talking more about people who come, you know, to work part of the week or part of the month in the city. So it maybe doesn't fit neatly into the usual sort of way we think about short-term lets.
Councillor MacDonald.
I noted that, you know, under the guidance, one of the things that for short-term lets was to help those with lower budgets to be able to go on holiday and so on. But I'm getting the impression that, you know, locums and construction workers and so on, it's not that particular tourism market, but it's obviously accommodation for people coming to Aberdeen that might need to be here on a regular, but a regular basis, but not particularly tourists, but would help the local economy and other aspects of the local economy.
Yeah, I mean, they would, you know, it would still fit into the short-term let sort of definition. You know, the planning couldn't control whether it's tourists or workers. It's just people staying. I think the main point in the case officer's report is about the level of amenity that's provided, and that's the reason for the 90-day limit.
Yeah, I'd agree with the officers there. It's looking at the square meterage of the individual flats itself, long term in those properties, that wouldn't be great. Any other questions for Ms. Green?
Can I just ask it? And I assume that that footage that you just mentioned, convener, I mean, in these houses, there'll be lions as well. I mean, the space in some of those, particularly upstairs rooms, will be restricted to the extreme, I would have thought. And not much amenity at all for visitors who are there for any length of time.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. In that regard, then, we will move to determinations. So in accordance with the procedure note circulated, the LRB will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. So at this moment, I'm content with the officer's conditions in regards to this. I think 90 days is absolutely the maximum that I would allow on this situation. And I completely agree with the terms of the 5-year review, because it meets our own housing needs and demand assessments, which is on the 5-year cycle. Anyone else wish to enter onto that? Councillor MacDonald?
I was considering whether it could be 5 years or 10 years in terms of the review, and I think on balance I would agree with you on 5 years in this case, but I have to absolutely concur with the 90 days, and would agree with you on that too.
Thank you. Councillor Thacker?
Also in agreement.
Okay, and Councillor Radley?
In agreement. The lack of amenity space is, 90 days is appropriate.
Perfect. So the local review body has therefore agreed to unanimously uphold the decision of the appointed officer, and the application is therefore will go forward as approved conditionally as per the recommendations. Okay, please note that decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant or agent in the forthcoming days. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our meeting, so we'll stop the recording, and if members can stay online to discuss the site visit, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.